Hi, this is Lamar, and you're listening to Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom. A third space is a term that refers to a safe space for people to come together for respectful dialogue in a spirit of listening, sharing, and learning. In this podcast, we explore what it means to have third space conversations, and we try to model them. If you like what you hear in this podcast, please be sure to subscribe, share it, and of course, like it. The more people join us, the quicker we get to third space as a society. Now let's get to third space today.
Hey, good morning. Well, yes, it is morning. Good morning, Lamar. How you doing?
Good morning, Tom. It is still morning in Kansas for sure.
It's still morning. It's a good thing you're, probably not in, Eastern Europe.
Well, yeah,
it'd be much later in the day. It'll at least be afternoon, right? So
how are things in Maryland? How you doing?
Well, I'm doing well. I am fully recovered from my surgeries and all that kind of stuff. And I celebrated by going out and rearranging the basement.
There's a lot of ways to celebrate. I guess that's one of them.
Well, it was. I was a little sore by the end of the day, but I could finally lift more than 15 pounds. So I said, great, let's just lift everything I can.
Well, good to have you back.
Well, thank you.
I know it's been a bit of a journey for you, so it's good to have you back and ready to go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And how are you doing? What's up with you, man?
Well, by the way, allergies continue to be the bane of my day, but so you'll hear me kind of clearing my throat on occasion. But doing well. It's been gorgeous here. Some intermittent rain. We've missed the big storms. I've been able to work outside most of the time.
Wow.
And that's been wonderful. I've got my vegetable garden going really well.
Nice.
Yeah. And so I have several raised beds, and we're getting the back deck. I had some things I needed to finish adding and fixing on the back deck. I have it all done, and we have a party on Saturday. So hey, if you're not doing anything, you want you guys to come on out.
Sure, I'll just zip right out there.
Yeah, burgers and brats and whatever side dishes people are bringing. So
that sounds like fun.
Yeah,
that sounds like fun.
And getting the camper ready. Yes, this weekend we're going to go out for. Before you go very far, you want to go out for at least a weekend to kind of do what's called a shakedown. Make sure everything's working, and you don't have to fix anything. So this afternoon, I'm taking it out for a shakedown tour.
Oh, I thought maybe you were going to go out for a little bit to see what you forgot.
Well, that's true. That will happen.
Yeah.
This is where you take a pad, pencil, and you create your lists. But we're not going far. We're just going down the road to a lake, and we'll be there for 2 nights. And making sure, again, everything works, and make a list of things I need to add or fix, or make sure we bring, because we're headed out later in the summer or later in the spring here for a pretty big tour.
Yeah. Yes, you are. So, I guess that's one of the reasons why early in the season you might want to, park overnight in a Walmart parking lot. Because then you go, oh yeah, we forgot that. Let's run.
Yeah, they're open late. We can get our stuff there, and we've done that. We have done the Walmart parking lot, and it's not what it's cracked up to be.
I was going to say, around here, what you would have to deal with are kids in hot cars cutting donuts.
Yeah.
In the parking lots, right?
Yeah.
So,
not all Walmarts let you do this, park there, but the ones that do usually let semi drivers park there too, and so you have trucks running all night. So it's just a very quick way to do an overnighter if you need to get from here to there.
Yeah.
And it is nice to have Walmart nearby, because you will need to stock your fridge. You will need to, There are times where it's like, oh, gee, I forgot to bring a movie, so let me go find a movie at Walmart.
Yeah, there you go. Go to the dollar bin, grab a movie. Perfect. Yeah.
A $5 bin. $5 bin.
$5. Oh,
yeah.
Man, yeah. Whew. Well, so I unpacked a little bit over the winter and unpacked all of my DVDs. and I popped them into a DVD player, and they just look terrible. They just look terrible. And then I go, well, wait a minute, though. I mean, surely they got to have a DVD player that plays these movies on these big screen TVs, right? And by golly, they do. And I thought, okay, I'm going to check this out. And I thought, what is this going to cost me? I was expecting $200-300, right?
Oh my goodness, no. Yeah.
$29.95.
Yep. That's if you buy it new.
And it was the exact same Sony that I had. It just that it connected with an HDMI cable, so it would play the 1080. So, oh man, it was beautiful.
Yeah,
really, really nice. So now I can watch. I can rewatch my whole series of Father Ted, and I can.
Oh,
years ago, somebody gave me the entire video disc of Monty Python's Flying Circus.
Oh, really?
I've got like a box set of those things, so I have to work my way through those.
So what are we doing today, Tom?
What are we doing today? We're talking about rights. My rights, your rights. Actually, we're talking about states' rights.
States' rights. That's right.
Yeah.
So we came to this after a discussion. We're going to be the first to say we do not purport ourselves to be as knowledgeable as many other people would be on these subjects.
And that's why our motto is, we don't know diddly squat, but we got opinions.
Opinions. That's right. But, we have conversation like everybody else has about what's the right thing to do, what's not, and why is this happening. And so we're going to have that conversation, and hopefully, people will find it stimulating. And remember, it's going to be a third space conversation because, as always, you and I are not going to agree on everything, but we will find ways to get through that.
Yeah, and we won't even call each other names.
Not this time, no.
No, not this time. Well, I think this whole thing about states' rights is really interesting because there has been a lot about it. Well, I don't know if I would say there's been a lot about it in the news, but what I do remember is that for many, many years, the Republican Party was kind of the party of states' rights.
Right.
That they were wanting very much for the federal government to stay out of the state's purview of laws and so on. And recently we were making the observation that seems to have flipped.
Right.
And that's what got us thinking about, well, what is the thing about states' rights? If states have certain rights or jurisdictions over certain laws, then why are we now seeing Congress and the president trying to press upon the states what they want in those areas that have typically been part of states' rights?
And maybe before we dig too deep into that, just kind of a general observation is, why wouldn't we see it flip? Because from my perspective, it kind of depends on who wants what and how do you get it.
Right.
And so if you happen to be the party that has the most power, has the most authority, you're going to use what means you can to further your cause or your perspective, so to speak. So I don't always believe it's about, we believe this to be true, and so we're going to always follow this path. It's right. My cynic says it's about how do you get to where you want to go and what tools do you want to use, and so flipping this states' rights to federal rights conversation is one way to do that.
Well, and I think, to be fair too, we need to say that there has always been a tension between federal rights and states' rights.
From day one. And when was day one?
Day one was right after the Revolution,
right,
of 1776. And at first, there was kind of a I think it was called a Confederation, Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. that basically it granted a lot of power to the 13 new states and very little to Congress, which made it really, really challenging to have an effective national government, and it created a lot of conflict between states. So, for example, states could issue their own money,
right,
and states could, they could have competing laws, practically, and it made it a little crazy trying to do business across state borders, and
they could have business agreements between each other that would blackball, so to speak, the business for another state. I mean,
yeah.
It was not a very fair system.
Right. It really wasn't. So recognizing that that level of confusion, they regathered in Philadelphia in 1787 and came up with the Constitution. Which
just about 10 years after the initial Constitution, right?
Yeah. So it was a mess for those 10 to 12 years. It wasn't a very, very happy thing. So they did come up with the Constitution, and it established a more balanced system between the states' rights and federal rights. And but even at that, there was still some confusion about what rights were rights. Probably the landmark, or the 10th Amendment in the Constitution,
correct,
seems to have really it was in the Bill of Rights that was ratified in 1791. That attempted to delineate or answer the question about who has what power. It says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Right. So in other words, if a power was not specifically delegated to the federal government, to the national government, or prohibited by the national government, then it was really up to the states or the people of the states to determine.
So that last phrase has kind of always been a question for me. And by the way, I have my little pocket version of the Constitution that is printed in Ontario.
Well, you don't have it memorized like I do?
Yeah, right. But the last phrase talks about nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Yeah. And that or to the people, I'm not sure I totally understand that phrase. Did you have an insight on that?
Well, I think that in the case where there hasn't been a determination made by the state, then it's really a matter. It's kind of like, I hope this is not a bad comparison. It's kind of like in California, the people can propose laws that then they can vote on enacting the different proposals.
Okay, propositions.
Propositions. And that's how I read that. That if there's no clarity about whether the state has that right or not, and certainly it's not a right that the federal government has, then the people of that state get to determine whether that is. Yeah. So, yeah, it's really an interesting. I have not thought that much about state rights versus federal rights, and so in the week or so that we've had to think about this and kind of dig into it, I have found it actually really pretty interesting. I
have too. I appreciated the exercise, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's been really good. It's been really good.
So, just by the way it's set up, we can see that there's going to be a tension between the federal government and the state governments.
Yeah,
and between state governments and state governments. When you think about it, okay, you and I, we're living in states where we are subject to the law. Actually, we're subject to the laws of the cities that we live into, ordinances, right?
Ordinances, right?
Right. We're subject to the state laws,
right?
Then we're also subject to federal laws, and there's kind of this your assumption is that everything kind of works together,
Yes,
but it don't always work together.
it does.
There's some challenges with that.
Yeah.
And it's not just about, I mean, basically it's the federal laws that are the heavy hitters and they, excuse the pun, trump the state and federal city ordinances. However, there's a lot of tentacles that go back and forth between those entities. So, for example, well, let's talk about what are the things that are enumerated to the states.
Well, to the states. So
Yeah.
the powers that are reserved for them are things like creating local governments,
Right.
regulating intrastate commerce, that is within the state, creating and maintaining public schools, which is an interesting one.
Yeah,
now.
That's kind of what I was thinking about.
Yes, and protecting public health and safety. There's another interesting one. Regulating marriage and divorce, and then of course holding elections.
And absolutely holding taxation. So funding the local government.
Yeah, local taxation.
Local taxation, right?
You're right, because taxation and levying tariffs is one of the, I think it's called enumerated powers that is really with Congress. But I think what's really interesting about those reserved powers there, except for creating local governments, to the best of my knowledge, I don't know that it seems like right now through a lot of executive orders that the president is trying to affect a number of these things that are really reserved powers for the state. But and we kind of flagged creating and maintaining public schools,
right?
With the disbanding of the. I mean, in one sense, yes. I mean, you and I both graduated from high school before there was a U.S. Department of Education,
right?
Which I think was in 1978, if I remember right, that was created. And so we grew up in a system in which the state really controlled, the education and creating, and maintaining public schools and determining the curriculum and all that kind of thing. And in one sense, it seems like the federal government now is wanting to return that power to the states, but with some caveats. We don't want you talking about DEI. We don't want you talking about, this various things. What's that?
Some historical things that we were taught are things that they're not wanting to be in the curriculum. But let me ask you, let me go back on what you just said a little bit ago. Do you think that since the creation of the Department of Education, that the Department of Education has had significant influence on how the states do education?
I think yes, and at the same time, no. I mean, they've had some influence. I mean, so for example, there has been more of an emphasis on standardized testing. Correct. And while there are many problems with standardized testing, from the creation of it to the administration of it, what it has done is tried to establish a kind of a baseline standard of what children and students know and how well they know it. I think that's a positive thing that the Department of Education has done. They've also, I think, done a fairly decent job of trying to make sure that funding is allocated to in an equitable way to school districts across the country, and trying to give more where more is needed and less where less is needed. And to me, that's pretty important, because I will tell you right now, I am not a fan of private elementary and high schools. Mm-hmm. If people want to go to private schools when they graduate from high school, fine. I did. I got no problem with that. But what's happening right now, even at the Supreme Court, in terms of saying that private religious schools are eligible for federal funding, I don't like that. I don't like that.
And so why don't you like that? What is the what will that do to the public schools that you're not excited about?
It takes funding away from public schools, which is
Okay.
odd because they're trying to eliminate the Department of Education anyway. And so I find myself wondering why this is even a thing, because if they eliminate the Department of Education, there won't be any money to go to the private schools. And in which case, if you want your kid to go to a private school, you pay for it. Got no problem with that. What I got a problem with is federal and state money being used for private elementary and high school secondary education. And my reason for that is that the reality is that all religious education, doesn't matter who it is, and I know Mennonites have schools, Quakers have schools, which are our two traditions. Catholics have schools. All religious traditions are attempting to influence the beliefs and ideologies of students beyond just simply teaching the basics. And it seems like that's what this current administration is so upset about. Well, we don't want DEI taught in the schools, and we don't want certain other things taught in the schools. We don't want sex education in the schools. We don't want these things in the schools because they're ideologically based, right? Well, a religious school by its very nature is ideologically based. And I don't know that it is appropriate. I mean, theologically, I very much am a person that believes in the separation of church and state, because I've never seen a situation, by the way, where the church has benefited from that in the long term. State's a pretty powerful entity.
So, if the funds are being diverted, I think one of the things that concerns me is the quality of the education in the public system.
Yes. Yes.
I think that's kind of what you were leading to as well, is that if the funds aren't available, then the ability of educators to handle the volume and do the things that we expect schools to do, along with, by the way, a lot of the other tertiary kinds of issues they have to deal with in a public school system, in any school system.
Right.
It takes a lot of resources.
Yes.
Now, I just happened to see yesterday a note, and I don't know. I want to make sure I make sure I make the statement that I don't know. I haven't followed up to see how valid this is, but concerns for defunding mental health services in public education.
Yeah.
Should that happen, and I was a part of providing those services for a long time.
Yeah.
Should that happen, students would not have access to the qualified services that they're going to need. And they do need those services. Not all students, but some students certainly do. And that makes a huge impact on the quality of education that student experiences.
Yeah.
So, and I'm using that student, but it represents thousands and thousands of students.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that what I'm seeing today, not just in the realm of education, but that concerns me around the states' rights and federal rights conversations, is it strikes me that the federal government right now is wanting it both ways. There are some ways in which they want the states to assume responsibility, and then other ways in which they want to come in and tell the states what to do.
Okay, but Tom, to be fair, is this a new phenomenon?
Well, it doesn't matter if it's a new phenomenon. It's just happening, man.
It's happening now. We're seeing it.
Yeah.
But it's been happening for a lot of years. It just depends on whether the influence that the federal government is wanting to exercise is one that we're good with.
Let me think about that for just a second. So I think think you're right that it's been happening for quite a while, but the fact that it's been happening for quite a while doesn't make it right.
I would agree.
And so I think I would be, at least I try really hard to be consistent. And I would say that had I had a consciousness of this in the past,
Okay.
I think I would be saying the same thing. It's like this, if you're going to turn education over to the states, then turn it over to the states. And if they want to have if they want to play volleyball all day long, then they can play volleyball all day long. That's fine. If they want to set up a curriculum that is more like a traditional curriculum, fine. But don't come in and say, well, you have to fund this, you have to take care of this, and by the way, this is what you're going to do.
So you just brought up funding.
Yeah.
And I think that's the major way things are influenced.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still on education.
Right.
But it's not just education where this happens. When we talk about how the federal government impacts the state's powers,
right,
it's often by funding some of the programs that the states are wanting to put into place,
right,
or that they have in place. Now, recently we saw a state, was it Arkansas? Where's Sarah Huckabee governor? Arkansas.
Yeah.
Was put in for disaster aid,
right?
FEMA aid, and was turned down and said, "No, you as a state take care of that."
Yeah.
So I see that as kind of a similar.
Yeah.
Now I'm not sure. I have hypotheses behind why that might be the case, but I think there's another example where the state has depended on the funding to do some of the work that they need to do, and it's very clear that the federal government can say no, unless you. Now, I don't know what was behind all of this, but to say unless you do what we're going to want, what we like, what we want to have happen, these dollars are not available.
Right.
And that is the kind of influence that I think probably happens in a lot of states in a lot of different programs.
Yeah, undoubtedly, yeah. That's true. So, the years ago, I was taking a course on public policy.
Okay.
And basically, what I took away from that was, I mean, in a nutshell, was that government and those in power, they have three tools available to them. Well, actually, people have three tools available to them: carrots, sticks, and sermons. And, a carrot is, we'll give you more money if you do this. Stick is, we'll take away money if you don't do this. And sermons are kind of left, unfortunately, to the most powerless, which right now we might say those would be like Democrats. Because all they have left are at that point the sermons, trying to prick the conscience of the federal government, their state governments, and actually, I should say, sermons are basically what podcasters have available to them too. We have no power, but hopefully, what we can do is that we can raise some issues and highlight some things that might invoke people to take some action. Call their representative, call their senator, not do anything, crazy, but, just speak up. And so I think that what we are seeing right now is the federal government is being really, really, really adept. Well, I don't know if I would call it adept, but they are using a lot the carrots and the sticks.
Yeah, I would definitely not call it adept. I say that trying not to just be tongue in cheek, but the the actions that are taken just seem pretty reckless, and I just don't see that as adeptness. Now, I've seen, we've watched actions regardless of what party's in office before, but the sweeping kinds of acts just is scary and reckless in my book. But
Yeah.
I get it. Some of the other things that the federal government is responsible for. Let's go there for a little bit. We haven't
Okay.
talked about that.
All right.
And by the way, the references that we're using, we're going to have in the podcast notes available for people to also review, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, we've got some great references for this particular podcast, so I hope you'll take the time to check them out.
You know, one of the things that I hadn't thought about, I'm looking at this list of what's called enumerated powers, right?
Yep.
And, you know, taxation and levying tariffs. Well, that's definitely in the federal government's lap and is definitely being used right now, right?
It's in vogue right now.
Yeah. You know, borrowing money and creating debt. That's definitely in the federal government's purview. But one that I thought was interesting was regulating foreign and interstate commerce.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I find this interesting is, I think, gosh, I got to go back and look at this, but I think there might have been a governor who tried to bypass the federal government in this respect to leverage some foreign agreements for some of the commerce that state.
Yeah.
Some of the products that state was producing, and I'm not sure how that turned out. But there's some other things that the feds have responsibly, obviously things like declaring war, right? Creating federal courts below the Supreme Court. And there are, oh gosh, I knew this at one time, but there are lots of federal courts, a lot of federal judges that many of them are still vacant, that need filling. There are obvious things that the federal government must be in charge of. But I think that this influencing power that the federal government has based off of dollars, and also based, if you take a look at the state leaders, kind of the threat that hangs over the state leaders can be, if you don't fall in step, we'll do everything we can so you don't get reelected.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So there are other types of threats as well.
Yeah.
And even internally, a state, depending on a party, would have these internal conflicts about staying in line with the party's position, and finding that the ceiling is in a way kind of a glass ceiling that you can't get through because it may be pretty well protected by that particular party, even from within the party.
Yeah, that's right.
So, you know, for example, we have a Democratic governor, and but we're a heavily Republican, state Congress. Being able to jump over leadership in our Congress to get a voice with a governor is a very hard thing to do.
Yeah,
if you're in Congress.
And actually, you know, this is a great place for a brief commercial to say that next week, our next podcast is actually going to feature Senator Ethan Corson.
Yes,
who is a Democratic senator there in the state of Kansas, and I'm sure part of that conversation we'll have with him will be about what is it like to be in such a super minority, if you will, in state governments, and how do you get anything done?
Well, I guess part of what I approach this whole thing trying to step back and say, I want to take a balanced look at this. I know that currently with the current administration, it's a hot topic of states' rights.
Right.
I know that. But I also want to be honest and say this is not a new conversation.
Mm-hmm.
We knew that this possibility happens. What is new, I think, is I've heard this term used often is how from day one the federal government kind of um, flooded these attempts to influence, by using executive orders.
Mm-hmm.
And it caught a lot of people off guard, a lot of people off balance, and state governments scrambling, trying to figure out how are we going to respond to these kinds of orders that are coming down. So it's really not a new conversation, and it's not going to go away as long as we have a constitution written the way it is. This is a tension that's always going to exist, and I guess I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Do you think that we might be seeing some of the pushback? Can we be thinking about some of the pushback over the president's tariffs as being representing some of that balance between state and federal power? And the reason I say that is I can imagine that the president is getting some phone calls from state governors.
Oh yeah,
and saying, wait a minute, do you understand what this means for our state?
Well, I'm sure that there's pushback from the state governments and from the state leaders, and which may be part of what I'm curious to see what's going to happen in the whole Arkansas disaster situation. But I think that in any administration, you got to figure out what floats their boat. What is it that really is impactful to them?
Yeah.
And I think what's most recently, if I could maybe hang my hat on this peg a little bit, but what's recently been impactful is a meeting that the administration had with Target and Walmart about here's what's going to happen. Just so you know, this is there are going to be empty shelves in our stores, and it's a real thing, and it's going to happen. And so I think with this administration, economy and business probably have the loudest voices. I could be wrong. I'd be interested to hear what other people think. But it seems to me that that's where the power lies right now.
So I think you're right. I think that the economy and business have loud voices with the president. But then I watch what the stock market is doing.
Yeah.
And it's really been pretty strong the last few days. And is expected to be strong again today, the day that we're recording this, which is May 1st, 2025. And so it would appear to me that those who have the most in terms of wealth have the most to gain. And as long as their portfolios are going up, they're not going to complain. But those that have the least and also have the least voice and access to the president are going to simply continue to see what they have to be stretched further, whether it's at Walmart or Target or Aldi or any other place.
I'm going to backpedal on that, what I said about that just a little bit, because I do think that, and this is more about education, both at the state level for public education and also for higher education, because this administration also is threatening to withhold funding for colleges and universities that have DEI still as part of their mission, and other types of educational focuses. I think the education department, the education institutions, both state level and at colleges and universities, do have a lot of voice, but it's not known yet how much voice they're going to have.
Yeah.
But I think they will have a lot to say and will have some influence in the future. I think they're a lot more powerful than we think. When I think of some of the universities, and many people who have ties to those universities also have, as alumni, have a strong voice. So I'm curious, and I'm curious how this is going to play out. My hunch is they're going to have a bigger voice in the near future.
Yeah, I think so. And certainly the one that has a fairly big voice right now is Harvard, but then nobody has the endowment that Harvard has.
It's about money, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that the college you worked at probably had a $50 billion endowment as well. Yeah. Yeah. But that buys them lots of time, to push back and a lot of security, to be able to push back, because they could be spending that down for a number of years before they really face the kinds of consequences that your college face or any of the colleges we've attended faced, even though they were private schools. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that what we're seeing, though, is that there is some pushback coming from other major universities. I think, in fact, the Big Ten formed kind of a coalition. If I remember right, I was reading about this, that they are forming some kind of coalition to stand with Harvard and to push back.
I will say, from my years working in higher ed, that those wheels tend to move slower than in the business world.
Yeah.
And sometimes painfully slow. But I do think that they're a very powerful voice.
Yeah.
So Tom, we've been in this conversation for about 40 minutes. So let me ask you something.
We've been wandering around in it, haven't we? Man?
We have, and I appreciate the listeners hanging in here. But let me ask you this. What do you think about the way the Constitution has set up the federal rights and state rights? How do you now that you and I have taken a little bit of time, and we are not experts in this field, but taken a little bit of time to look at this, do you think this is a workable arrangement going forward?
So I do, only because next year we're going to celebrate our 250th year as a country. And that means that for close to 240 years, the Constitution has worked pretty well. I think the brilliance of the Constitution is that they walk this really interesting line between being too general and being too specific. They couldn't be really specific because the people who were in the Constitutional Convention, they understood that the world of 1787 was not going to be the same as the world of 1987 or 1887 or 2087. And so they try not to lock it in to too specific. And yet at the same time, they didn't make it so general that anybody and anything could step into the gap. I think that's the brilliance of the Constitution. I think that it's, we have always depended upon the courts to help us understand what the Constitution means and how it should be applied at this time. However, we have got to have a sense of confidence in the courts that has been lost. We have to have a balance in the courts. We have to have a balance in Congress. I really am not a favor of the one-party system, or regardless of which party's in control. Not in favor of it, because that's when things go to extremes. And I would say the same thing about the Supreme Court. I don't want a 7-3 split. or 6-3 split. Excuse me. I want 4-4 with the Chief Justice maybe sometimes having the deciding vote. That's what I want, because I think that's when all of the interests or most of the interests of the country are best served, is when we have the tension of what is before us, and we have to engage in some civil dialogue, some very thoughtful conversation to arrive at a strong consensus of how we move forward. And the Constitution has allowed us to do that for the most part. I think recently it's been kind of scary.
It has been, because there are ways to take advantage of gaps.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe something of what we're seeing. And or it hasn't been tested maybe in some of the ways it's being tested today.
Yeah.
But
how do you feel about it?
Yeah, well, thanks. I actually feel very good about the way the Constitution is written. Now, I am not someone, I don't like functioning in black and white. you know me. Neither one of us do.
I agree with that. That absolutely.
I live with a lot of gray things in my perspective in life, very happily. But the more you try to define rules, regulations, policies, procedures, the more you paint yourself into corners.
Mm-hmm.
And because life just it doesn't work that way. And so I think the writers, did an exemplary job in putting this together, in thinking about how the country is going to continue to develop and change, and giving, and the separation of powers, I think, is a wonderful concept. You mentioned the one-party system. I think I'm not sure how to get around that, because the country, being that we're a democratic republic, right? We're a democracy. We vote our people in. We take responsibility for that and ownership in that. So if I say, for example, from where I'm at right now, and I say I have lost confidence in the court system, I've lost confidence in the Supreme Court, for example, that's from my seat. That's not necessarily where other people are at in the country.
Right. That's right.
And it's important for me to recognize that. For some people, this is exactly where their confidence is lying.
Right.
Is in that, in kind of where things are at with the courts, etc. I have a lot of faith in the system. I have a lot of faith in how this system can work. I think its accountability is the thing that I'm most concerned about.
Yeah. And
you and I, if we were to do some of the things that we're seeing, I give you an example. The firing of a lot of the federal workers, right? When I was working in manufacturing, there were laws in place as to how we could go about, reducing the workforce in our company. Yeah. We had to follow those laws. If we did not follow those laws, we could get fined heavily, and we're open to exposure legally.
Yeah.
That's not happening at what's going on now.
Yeah.
The firing. Deportation without due process, that is happening now. And I don't think anyone can argue that there's not due process. I mean, it's very evident there's not due process. Is against the legal standards that we have in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to be a U.S. citizen to get due process. You have to be a person in our country, according to the way everything is written.
Right.
So what bothers me is the system not being held accountable to what the common practice and what the current laws are. That's what bothers me. But I think that the Constitution and the way the government is set up is a good system for us to continue. Even though I don't agree with maybe where the Supreme Court tends to lie, I have to recognize that there are people that do agree with that have voted people into place. So that's kind of my perspective. Does that help?
Yep,
Does that make sense?
does. It does. And something you said made me think about this, that the Constitution needs to be seen as a living document as opposed to a once and done document. And so as a living document, it has to be interpreted through the lens of the times in which we live. Understanding that in 1787 they could not speak to what our life would be like in 2025, and that times change, information changes, knowledge changes, and so we have to think about that. I know that there are strict what is the term, strict constructionists, or people who believe in the strict interpretation of the Constitution, as if it just it was one and done in 1787, and there's no need to try to interpret it in terms of how things are today. I don't agree with that. I think we have to see the Constitution as a living document, and that's always going to mean that we have to bring in a variety of people who have different ways of thinking about it. There has to be good conversation. There has to be an earnest and sincere effort to try to strive to find what is the best way to understand that for these times. I wish we saw more of that right now in Congress. I wish we saw more of it in the Supreme Court. And I do think that's why the Supreme Court's been slipping in its approval. And I think that's why Congress is really, really low in its approval right now.
So, well, that begs, though, for us to point out that when you say slipping in approval, you're talking about public approval, right?
Public approval.
And what happens, I get back to the concept of democracy, which is a conversation I keep thinking we might want to have sometime.
Yep.
But in a democracy, I'm going to have that opportunity to make a difference.
Yeah.
In both the state leadership and federal leadership, and so approval in our system means a lot.
Yeah, it does. It does.
So this has been an interesting conversation, Tom. Once again, we probably missed a lot of good understandings and possibilities here. I would be very interested to hear what some other people have to say. We are not experts in this, but we are part of the system.
Yep.
And these are the kind of conversations that I'm hoping people have around the coffee table or around the kitchen table, just like you and I have.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the whole point, right?
That's right.
We didn't solve anything. We didn't fix anything. But we had a good conversation that I'm sure I know I'm thinking about some things that you've said very differently, and you might be as well.
Same way. Same here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like what we talked about the last time too. Winning is off the table.
Winning is off the table.
That's right.
And hopefully in this conversation, winning is going to benefit us nationally.
That's right.
That we can work together to solve some of these challenges. So,
absolutely. Well, Lamar, how do people get in touch with you?
They can. There's a lot of ways, but probably the easiest way from this podcast is to email me at Lamar, Lamar, third space, 3RD, third space, at gmail.com.
Right.
How about you, Tom?
Well, you can email me at Tom, third space, same thing, 3rdspace@gmail.com. If we said something or you are enjoying this podcast and you'd like to share with others, please share it. And make sure that you also, whether it's on YouTube or wherever you find us, if you like us, that would be kind of nice too. And send us a comment. That would be terrific. All right. Well, Lamar, have a great weekend.
Sir. You as well, Tom.
All right. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Tom here. Thank you for listening to Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom. Remember to click on subscribe to get notices about new episodes, and be sure to like and share the podcast as well. Opinions and ideas expressed in this podcast are solely those of Lamar Roth and Tom Klaus, and we'd like to hear your opinions and ideas too. You can leave us a voice message on Spotify, or you can email us at the addresses found in the show notes. Also, in the show notes, you can find links to some of the things we talked about today, so you can check them out yourself. Until next time, keep moving forward toward third space.
This program was produced with way too much Colombian coffee.